Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones that you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. A quick note for new listeners, if this is your first time joining us, part of the whole structure of the show is this initial very long intro. It goes on for roughly 15 minutes, but if you want to get straight to the story, there's a timestamp in the show description that will get you straight there. But aside from a bit of promotion, which I'm about to go into, the intro does serve a purpose, which I will explain in a few minutes. So I do recommend you stick with it. For people who haven't skipped straight to the story, and for the people who have been with me for a while, I'd like to start out by thanking the listeners who support the show or have supported the show on Patreon. You've all been instrumental in helping me to keep the show running. Whether you've backed the show for a few months or one, at any level, I'm very grateful for your support. If you are finding that the show helps you to get a good night's sleep weekly, nightly, or however often you find yourself needing to listen, and you would like to help me keep the show running and available for free, I'd like to ask you to take a look at patreon.com/sleepytimetales, also linked in the show notes, to take a look at the support levels and what bonuses are available to patrons, including from as little as $1 a month. I'm not going to go into too much detail about what's on offer, but it's worth just taking a look. But as a bonus to new $5 patrons, up till the end of December, I'm going to send one handwritten postcard. So if you're keen and would like to get something fun and touristy from Durban, South Africa, please sign up soon. The music in this episode and all episodes thus far is Un Désert by Kumiku. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive. I've linked their website and their Patreon in the show notes because they've got some very cool stuff which they release under different names depending on the style that I definitely recommend people check out. Thanks for taking the time to listen, and back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It's a bit of a strange idea, isn't it? A podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast or a sleep aid that is intended to help those that can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night with your mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties and stresses of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself just not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them anymore, it was always a struggle for me to sleep. It was later in life that I discovered the tendency for droning male voices to act almost like a tranquilizer and put me straight to sleep. And I realized after a while that I've got a droning male voice, so maybe I can do something to help others to get a good night's sleep. As I mentioned up front, this intro goes on for roughly 15 minutes, and it is here for a couple of reasons. Firstly, for new listeners, I need to explain the whole idea of the show and the structure and everything about it, and try and make the case for why you might want to do something quite so strange as listen to a podcast in the dark while a stranger drones at you. And the other thing is, for older listeners, people who've been with me for a while, this is part of the whole preparation for getting to sleep. This is the time when they brush their teeth, have a drink of water, turn the lights out, make sure they're nice and snuggled and wrapped up in their blankets and in an environment that's not too hot. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a space together here. I'm trying to help you to build a nest or a cocoon, some sort of whatever environment it is that you feel comfortable in, to try and help you to get a good night's sleep and to try keep the stresses of life out. Now, as far as I know, there's a couple of different ways to engage with the show. For me, when I listen to stuff at night to help me sleep, I actually need something to focus on, a story or an event that lets me keep my mind on a specific point to help me stop my mind from spinning out of control into stress and anxieties. I need just enough focus not to resist the embrace of a night's sleep, but something not so fascinating that I just can't get to sleep. Some people's needs are a little bit more direct and a little bit more primal. Some people need white noise in the background, the sound of waves or the sound of rain or maybe a droning male baritone. So for them, just turn the volume down and let me drone on in the background. Now, the last couple of episodes, and probably this one and one more, are going to be my special holiday episodes. Because I work in the hospitality industry, I don't really have much time to do prep and stuff, unfortunately, at the moment. And my original stories take quite a lot of preparation. So what I'm doing now is I'm just doing cold readings from interesting stories that I've found that I like. Really old stuff, similar actually in the catnap bonus episodes that I do, similar sort of thing, except longer. Those are about 10, 15 minutes, and these go on about 50 minutes to an hour. But, and tonight's an interesting story from The Swampers by Hume Nisbet. Quite an interesting little piece of fiction that's quite interesting, but I'm going to try and make it a little bit less fascinating so that you're asleep by the time I get to the end of the episode. Because ultimately, it doesn't really matter what the story is because, well, I need to take care with it, obviously, because I have to respect you as a listener. But what's important is you should be asleep by the end of it, if all goes well. Whatever happens, whatever the story is, whatever the theme, it's important that you don't try to force the sleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the thread of the story, and when sleep comes for you, you won't even know to fight it. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it's important that you don't feel pressurized. It may not work on the first night. It may take a few nights for you to get used to listening to my voice. Maybe my accent is strange to you. Maybe one episode isn't long enough. Queue up a couple of episodes and let them run, and I'll be here for you as long as you need. That's up to you. What is very important, though, is that you have to try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may take a while, possibly even a few days, for this to work for you. So queue up a few episodes or just run through the backlog. What I do with the sleep podcast is I just let it stream all night. I lie down in the dark with my earbuds in and I just let it run. Sometimes when I wake up at 3 a.m., the stream is still running and I just let those voices waft me straight back to sleep. Something that happens with me quite a lot is I wake up 30 minutes or 60 minutes before my alarm goes. That used to really frustrate me, but now I just carry on listening to whatever I'm listening to and I fall right back asleep. And I've got to tell you that sometimes that 30 minutes can be the best part of my night. There is something about just allowing sleep to take you right before you actually need to get up that is just like deeply, deeply satisfying. And so you have the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark. And while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me. I'm here to help you relax, to improve your life in a small way. Or is it small? I'm not going to claim it's a major part in improving people's lives, but people don't sleep very well these days, and if I'm here to do what I can to do a small part to help you, that's I think it's important. It's important for you and it's important for me that I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you to face tomorrow and the day after, well rested and better able to cope. something that's important to me, particularly in the context of this podcast. And it's something that I have to admit I struggle with sometimes in my natural life. I'm a bit of a sarcastic person and I'm trying to work on it. But in this space, in this podcast, it's very important that we work on kindness together. I'm here to be kind to you. I'm here to help you sleep. And it's all in vain if you can't be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep. And the intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling that we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and just drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep and let my voice wash over and under you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy. But it is not your enemy. Sleep is a natural process. It's fundamental to our nature as human beings, and we've been pulled away from it by stress and strains and life that creates progress that shines bright lights in our eyes at all hours. So I'm here to work with you to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. The Swampers by Hume Nisbet. Available on Project Gutenberg Australia. Chapter 1. The Den of the Modern Wizard. Professor Mortikali sat in his inner sanctum, waiting for customers. It was a hot day during the early portion of the month of March 1896. And although the professor had all his blinds drawn down and occupied the coolest corner of the arcade, he still could not shut out those intense waves of Sydney heat that swept in between the crevices of the doors and windows, although he managed to shut out a good deal of the intense light. Never had such a hot season been in the memory of the oldest colonist as this heat wave of 1896. From January 1st to the 24th, it had ranged from 112 degrees to 129 degrees in the shade in New South Wales, and people had dropped dead wholesale throughout the colony. In many of the inland townships, the people had been panic-stricken and fish were killed in the creeks and lakes by tons upon tons. It had cooled off a little by March, yet there were days, and this was one of them, when the heat fury of January seemed to repeat itself. The professor liked shadow, for he was a modern wizard and his business did not require much light. Indeed, the less light that was thrown upon it, the better it was conducted. Therefore, it was not often that the green Venetian blinds were drawn up. The professor was at present resting on his oars, for it was the slack hour of the day, the hour when no one, unless absolutely forced to come out, would care to face the terrific sun glare of midday. The professor was of that peculiar craft which flourished so much during the earlier centuries, and has more or less flourished ever since under various disguises. He belonged to the tribe of the Witch of Endor, that profession of seers and foretellers whom King Saul tried to put down in his vigorous and virtuous years, and afterwards weakly consulted in his decline. The same craft which that modern Solomon, King James I of England, so rigorously hunted to death, and which might have died naturally only for the efforts of the Psychological Society, and that able editor of Borderland, the discoverer of the fourth dimension. It is not a profitable profession in merry old England, where the police imitate the tactics of King Saul and James, and take as much delight in making raids as lively terriers do in hunting out rabbits. But in progressive New South Wales, where convict laws still hold sway, and men are hanged for attempted murder, while judges dictate to jurymen, as the celebrated Jeffreys used to do, and where even the judges themselves consult the witches, fortune-telling and witchcraft thrive wonderfully, even in the midst of the universal depression which of late has fallen upon the colonies. In the Sydney of today, you may see, amongst other closed places of business, the shutters up of many public houses and bars. The reason of this is that they have been raided by the police because the proprietors have been selling poison undiluted to their customers. And although the colonized stomach can stand a good deal in the way of vitriol and bluestone, yet when the landlord omits to give his customers even the flavor of brandy, rum or whiskey, then his fate as a landlord is decided. They're a proud and conservative race, the New South Welshmen. They cannot stand the slightest approach to a joke about their country. You may abuse England or London as much as you're disposed to an Englishman, and he will only laugh unctuously. But you must not take the same liberty with a New South Welshman. His harbour is the most beautiful harbour in the world. If you admit this, yet suggest that the buildings might be just a little more classic, he will grow pale with passion and cut you dead. If you venture to hint that morality in its aesthetic quality is not so strictly observed amongst the politicians and tradesmen as it might be, he will consider it time to regard you as a dangerous person and a fit subject for the martial law that hangs first and tries afterwards and is still in such active force in that sun-slaved colony. They aim to be very high-toned in Sydney and imitate as nearly as they can the manners of fashionable London. Therefore, if an accomplished swindler or thief comes among them and knows his business thoroughly, he is nearly sure to be successful. For the veneer being all that they aspire to themselves, so they are satisfied with it in their visitors. In Victoria and Queensland, the inhabitants are less conservative and much more level-headed. Professor Mortikali was a wonderful man in his way, and pursued various branches as a livelihood. On his brass plate it was written, Professor Mortikali, psychometrist, pneumatologist, futurist, and magneto-electric healer. He called his establishment the Egyptian Mystic Hall and Health Sanatorium, and had on his bills a wide range of subjects, from character delineating by phrenology and physiognomy, fortune-telling by cards, palmistry or astrology, with the art of healing all diseases by hypnotic treatment. There are hundreds in the same line of business throughout Sydney, and all apparently flourishing more or less despite the dull times. In the arcade were 3 rivals, while along the principal streets every 5th or 6th shop bears the sign of a futurist or an astrologer, with all the paraphernalia exhibited in the windows which one expects to witness in the windows of a wizard. In the newspapers also of this enlightened and conservative country, along with singular gems of poetry in the form of memoriam verses, you may read every day advertisements like the following: Wanted, a loving clairvoyant test lady with means preferred as life partner by magnetic healer, etc. And yet no one laughs either at the verses or the advertisements. They have become so accustomed to both. But they get terribly vicious if any stranger attempts to criticize their politicians or their professionals. Professor Mortikali had his front window artfully set out, a plaster cast of the hand of deeming the murderer, with casts and photographs of actors, clergymen, and other distinct types were displayed. A phrenological head stood on a stucco pillar, and the complete skeleton of a baby dangled inside a glass case. Specimens of snakes and tapeworms were coiled in bottles or dried and stuffed and grouped about, while the invariable alligator, which Hogarth has accustomed us to in his pictures of the quack, was likewise displayed. A curtain, half drawn back from the doorway, revealed the image of a gypsy holding out her hand to be crossed with silver, while at a little counter sat an attractive-looking girl, costumed in black velvet, scarlet facings, and glittering metallic discs, such as we were used to gaze on at fairs in our youthful days. There was no attempt at advancement or dressing up to date in this establishment. The old-fashioned arrangements appeared to answer the purpose perfectly. The same amount of rouge and powder on the face of this attractive handmaid to the wizard, the generous display of snowy neck, and the usual surroundings of curtains, herbs, and stuffed monstrosities. They were all there, while inside awaited the futurist and faith healer. At this precise hour of midday, the professor and his handmaid were both similarly occupied in discussing their lunch. Hers was a slight refection, as befitted a Sydney nymph of her light and powdery nature. A couple of tarts and an ice cream, which she had procured at the next door. The ice she had finished first, before it became liquid, and now she was leisurely discussing the fruit and pastry. Inside the sanctum, the professor was having a heavier meal, as befitted the nerve wear and tear of his occupation. An underdone beefsteak with a chunk of bread and a tankard of colonial beer, vulgarly called swanky. The professor was a man well advanced in years, of an ordinary height and inclined to run to stoutness. He wore his iron grey tresses long so that they fell over his back in a lank and straggly fashion. His beard and moustache were also grey and mangy, while his rubicund complexion, commonplace features, and very small eyes reminded one somehow of a mendicant friar of the Middle Ages. His small eyes were crow-like and rather vacant in their expression, and what linen he displayed was of the dirtiest and most rumpled description. His garments also, although at one date black, had evidently been purchased at a second-hand establishment, and were both frayed and rusty as well as badly fitting, and being originally of the dress suit order, gave him the appearance of a broken-down waiter at a poor restaurant. He was not a wholesome-looking object, while he wolfed his steak as a dog might devour its meal. The steak was badly cut and indifferently cooked. The intense heat of the atmosphere, the perspiration running from the professor's forehead and cheeks in dirty rivulets, and his dirty hands helping the fork. Ignorant, low-bred, square-pointed fingers, unclipped nails in deepest mourning, and, added to this, that vacuous mouth with the slobbering lips taking in the steak with such evident unction, and the solitary, unwashed tooth emphasizing that moist unction, rendered this hypnotic disciple of borderland rather gruesome than pleasant. As he sat, he scratched his head sometimes with his dirty nails, sometimes with his greasy fork. He also fumbled suggestively about his half-opened waistcoat, as one is used to see tramps do when they fancy themselves unobserved. Together, this Sydney interpreter of borderland law gave one the decided impression of that drawing in Punch by Harry Furness, of the man who wrote about Pear's soap. 2 years ago I used your soap, since when I've used no other. Harry Furness's model was attenuated and unkempt, but fancy a professor of mystic law in bad-fitting waiter's dress suit, the knees baggy and the vest overtight, the angry buttons threatening to sever. Burly as a friar of old and soft as a retired bantam boxer, with a vacuous countenance and crow-like eyes, always on the goggle, and you have the professor, or ancient wizard up to date. Supplement this with the awful heat of a Sydney midsummer day, an underdone steak cut in colonial fashion and cooked ditto, the natural perspiration and fumes of an unwashable tramp, decked up in an old dress suit, and you may realize the picture of this high priest of the Temple of Mystery without further description. He had just finished his gorge and imbibed his last drop of colonial swanky, when the handmaid popped in her head and shedding a tiny stream of pearl powder, which, after all, sweetened the apartment a little, announced in brassy tones, "Are you done, Professor? There's a lady a-waiting to consult you." The professor bundled his plates and beer mug to a side table, where he covered them with an old newspaper. Then, dusting the crumbs aside with his hand and wiping his hands again on the tails of his coat, he produced a greasy pack of cards and said with calm dignity, "Yes, Matilda, show the party in." The party entered, a young woman of about 25, fashionably dressed and according to the season in virgin white, with a Donner-like bunch of snowy ostrich feathers in her hat, and a cloud or dust veil above her face. She was slim-built and graceful in figure, and the professor, who loved the fair sex, took notice that she had a wealth of golden-brown hair under the drooping feathers. "Sit down, my dear," he said with a smirk on his sweaty and greasy red face, and the party sat and silently looked at him through her cloud. "Is it your fortune you want to know, by the cards or by the hand? Or are you in any other trouble that a man in my experience can help you? Girls will be girls, you know, my dear, and therefore you may safely give me your confidence, for it won't be abused." He bared his lonely tooth and regarded her with a senile smile, while his crow-like, vacant gaze tried to get behind the cloud. "No, old man, I don't want any confidence business. I only want you to tell me my fortune by my hands and by the cards. It's unlucky, they say, to do both at one sitting, yet if you turn around and go to the door and cross back again, that will break the charm. Which will you have first? My hand, Professor. Tell me what I've done and what I'm going to do, and then I can ask you other questions when we come to the cards. She held out her hands, palm upwards to him, and after giving himself a preliminary hitch and scratch, he stooped over them to examine. Shapely the hands where they were, with tapering long fingers and fleshy palms, which had hard and well-defined lines running across them. You are married, the professor said after a pause. Well, what of that? No more than you think of it yourself, my dear. If you had some troubles in the past and they had some adventures, but your marriage has not been a happy one. There are no children and you'd like to be free of your bond. Yes, and shall I? I see a death here and a little trouble, but your line of life is clear. Shall I be married again? Yes, and have much prosperity in the future. That'll do, and will it come off? How old are you? 26. You'll be married again before you are 28. Budgery for you, old man. Now let's try the cards. She rose abruptly and went to the door, returning in a moment, while the professor arranged his cards. There's an old fellow waiting for his fortune at the door, Professor. Will you take him or me first? She asked as she returned. Ladies first, of course, answered the professor gallantly, again baring his solitary tooth. Drive ahead then, for I'm in a hurry, said the young woman curtly. Shuffle and cut. After she had done so, he began to read. There's a dark man here close beside you, your husband, I should say. But you turn your back on him. You take heart, do you not? Yes, she replied. Yes, replied the young woman. There's a diamond man facing you. That is the one you fancy. Go on. You'll get that diamond man, but the clubman will cause you some trouble. There's a death here. To the clubman, eagerly. I don't know yet. Shuffle again and I'll tell you. Thrice did the cloud-veiled woman with the strong white hands shuffle the cards, and then he answered her curiosity and desires. Yes, the clubman will pass from your path, and the diamond man is the winner. Thank heavens for that, she said, as she paid him his fee and went forth, brushing by the white-haired customer who was waiting his turn. She did not look at the white-haired customer. She was too closely veiled for anyone to see her features. Yet he glanced after her through his blue glasses in a curious way as she went out to the doorway. Then he sought the professor. A tall and singularly powerful-looking man he was, the second visitor, dressed in thin grey serge, smooth-faced and with a shock of white hair that fell about his shoulders after the style of the ex-Premier of New South Wales, that leonine and doggerel verse writer, Sir Henry Parkes. Indeed, for a moment the professor thought that this much-married politician must have shaved and mounted blue glasses as a sort of disguise. But he soon recovered himself with the assurance gained from the knowledge that this eminent man would never sink his personality, no matter what position he chose to take up. Therefore, he became composed and ready for his visitor. I want my future read, said the stranger. By the palm or by the cards? The hand will do. He stretched a sinewy hand out to the professor's magnifying glass. You've experienced troubles in the past. Yes. But you have a singularly open and confiding as well as a generous nature. I may say that you are a man who has been imposed upon by false friends, and may be a gain if you're not particularly careful. You... What a confounded old fraud you are, to be sure, Jeremiah Judge. The stranger, as he uttered these words, his left hand still lying under the professor's magnifying glass, removed with his right hand the blue spectacles and snowy wig, and revealed a hard-faced but handsome young man, with short cropped black hair and glittering black eyes. Fancy me being sucked in by anyone. The professor fell back on his chair, confounded, his crow-blue eyes almost darting out of his head as he uttered the feeble cry, Jack Milton, by George! Chapter 2. A Confidential Conversation. Yes, you genial old humbug. I've come back once more to do some business in Sydney. As he spoke, Jack Milton, as he had just been called, leaned back in his chair and regarded the pneumatologist with a benevolent yet contemptuous air of patronage. Still trying your best in your small way to do the public, I see, Jeremiah, and doing it shabbily at that, per usual. The psychometrist got upon his ambling legs with a gushing air of welcome illuminating his steaming face and parting his vacuous mouth. My dear, dear boy, who'd have been expected to see you here? I thought your time wasn't up for another 12 months. How have you done it? I behaved myself and kidded the sky clerk, therefore got my ticket. What was the little item? A mere trifle in the past, something I did in Melbourne long ago and which I had forgotten, or I should not have gone there quite so openly. But the text remembered me and laid me up by the heels for a spell. However, it wasn't an unmixed evil, for being in lavender gave me the repose that I required, and put the Sydney centres quite off my track. Good, very good, chuckled the professor, rubbing his hands together and gazing admirably at the powerful figure before him. You'll find hosts of friends who are glad to see Jack Milton amongst them again, and none so more than your humble servant. While the old humbug was speaking, the young man carefully replaced his white wig and blue spectacles, and became once more a kind of benevolent replica of a clean-shaved Sir Henry Parkes. I have made an appointment with my lawyer to meet me here, Jeremiah, or, as you call yourself now, Professor Mortikali. I thought it safer than at his own office. Much safer and more secluded. So I thought. But how did you find me out, Jack, eh? Well, you're not exactly the kind of one to give an agent much trouble if he wanted to get on your tracks. I knew you'd be up to some business of this kind where spirits or mesmerism had a share in it. Call it hypnotism, Jack, or psychometry. Yes, that's exactly how I spotted you, old boy. I looked at all the old signboards as I came along for the most jaw-cracking words. I knew your weakness for that sort of thing. Palmist or futurist wouldn't be good enough for you. Therefore, when I came to Professor Mortikali, psychometrist, pneumatologist, etc., I felt sure I had run my fox to his hole and I wasn't far out. No, Jack, you'd make a first-rate detective, if you wasn't better than that. A first-class crib cracker, eh? It takes a thief to catch a thief, but I don't belong to that race who can utilize their experience to snare their own kind. I have always been and shall always be to my pals. Is this much of a trade? He looked about him with a little disgust, and at the shabby professor with a humorous air of pity. Fairly, observed the psychometrist. I hold my own. This is the slack time of the day, but at night they come up wonderful considering. You haven't got a fashionable class of customers I can see, or you'd be better togged up. Never mind, I'll put you up to something good before many days are over our heads. No, Jack, no, I'd rather not, cried the professor nervously. I don't mind helping you when the game is safe, but you are so reckless, my dear boy, and don't at all consider personal safety. Now, you see, I'm doing small things and the police won't touch me at 'em, but one never knows where he'd land if this business spread out into many more new branches. The business I'm going to set you up is strictly in your own line, psychometry and other PHs. You're too cramped here. You want bigger and more fashionable premises, and to get yourself togged up more like an orthodox medical professor, and less like a broken-down waiter, and I've spotted the shop that'll suit you to a nicety. Do you know that place where Briscoe the jeweller used to be in George Street, with the bank on one side and the pawnbroker on the other? Exactly. Would those diggings suit you to open a branch establishment of the faith-healing and fortune-telling fake? What do you mean, Jack Milton? Do you know their mere premises will cost in rent and taxes near to 1,000 a year? Well, and the fixing of them up properly with furniture, carpets and sofas, etc., will come to nigh 500 quid. You've hit it pretty nearly, I should say, to do it properly, replied Jack calmly. You'll want some attractive-looking girls with a little more style than this one here, and some respectable toggery for yourself. Yes, you'll need all the money and more perhaps till business comes in. Yes, and who's going to pay for all this outlay? I will, my sage psychometrist. I think there are vast possibilities in this business of yours if properly worked in the city, And as I happen to have this pendulux, or will have it if my lawyer, who will be here presently, isn't a fool as well as a rogue, I'll set you up and be your sleeping partner. I'm going to make a boom in the prediction business. We'll take in the national sports and give the juggins tips from Spiritland. We'll pitch our placards and bills about like snowflakes and make the pressmen our serfs by advertising. But you must try to acquire the art of washing yourself and changing your linen at least 3 times a week while the hot weather lasts. Or it'll all be bunkum. Do you savvy, my odoriferous psychometrist? Don't you see what I mean? Plenty of water, Pears soap, fresh linen, and a trifle of jockey club or cherry blossom for the sake of business. Also nail brush and a little attention to the nails, at present in deepest mourning for your rubbishy sins, which ain't worth so much respect. Lemons are first-class articles for cleaning the hands and nails, and Sydney waterworks are lavish with their supply. I ain't at all averse to washing in the warm weather, observed the professor with an injured air. I likewise like a frequent change of shirts and collars, and feel kindly drawn to clerical neckcloths, if I had the articles to work on. You'll have them. Meantime, I want you to keep out all your customers, or read their fortunes at your outside counter this afternoon while my man of business is engaged with me, and we'll arrange all that afterwards. By Jove, you'll be a great man, Professor, if you had a fair chance, and I'm going to give you that chance. Will you have anything to drink now? Said the Professor respectfully, for Jack Milton had spoken to him in the lordly manner of one who has means at command, and the panderer referenced him accordingly. Not at present. I have a lawyer to talk to, and I bet he won't imbibe until he has finished this interview, and neither shall I. I say, do you know anything about my wife? I don't know exactly where she lives, of course, but I have seen her. Lately? Yes, just recently, I may say. Yes, and is she looking well, my Rosa, my darling? A wonderful change took place in the disguised housebreaker as he asked these questions. He was no longer cynical nor supercilious, but eager and boyish, while by contrast the professor seemed to become ill at ease and constrained. You are proud of her yet, I see, Jack. Of course, why should I not be? My wife, the woman I love and have always kept as well as I could. She doesn't know what I have had to do for a living and to keep her comfortable, unless my lawyer has proved a traitor, which I hope he hasn't, for his own sake. Tell me, what do you know about her? Did you see the young lady in white who went out of here as you entered? Yes. That was your wife. I thought there was something familiar in her figure and walk, but what was she doing here? She came to have her fortune read. I know, the little stupid. She wanted to learn when her husband would be home again, eh? The professor looked at the eager face before him, as if he was making up his mind to say something difficult. Then he replied, yes, that was what she wanted to know. Of course, and you gave the little jade a lot of idle promises and sent her away happy. Yes, in the usual fashion. I promised her a lot according to her desires and sent her away fairly well pleased. Good. I'll make you a true prophet this time, you old scoundrel, ha ha ha. And this moment the handmaid put in her head and said, There's a gents outside as ever called by appointment. That's my man, cried Jack cheerily. Show him in. Molly, my darling, and you, to the professor, clear out until I'm done with him. As he spoke, there entered a well-set-up man of about 33, with a blonde moustache and close-cropped fair hair. His blue eyes a trifle closely set together and a vulture-like nose. He was a keen-looking, business-like man, well-dressed and well-groomed, and one who would not be likely to let scruples stand in the way of personal advantage. At his watch chain he carried, as an appendage, a pair of compasses and square. His necktie pin was also adorned with the same quaint design, and while on the 4th finger of his left hand he wore a plain gold signet ring with the same device, evidently showing to all the world that he was not at all ashamed of the society to which he belonged. As he entered he looked at the white wig and blue spectacles, with an air of perplexity for an instant, until the wearer gave him a quick sign. Then he advanced smilingly and said, How do you do, Mr. Milton? All right, my friend, sit down. The professor had cleared out of the sanctum by this time, dropping the heavy curtain behind him, and leaving the lawyer and his client together. Well, Mr. Chester, have you carried out my instructions? Yes, Milton, I have carried out your instructions to the letter, and I need to not tell you at considerable risk to myself. The lawyer, now that they were alone, spoke in a severe tone of voice, as one might to a criminal whose case is in hand, but who has placed himself beyond the reach of ordinary courtesy, while the ticket of leave man listened meekly, and without appearing to observe the curtness. I have invested your money as you desired in my own name. I did not ask you how it was made. I have no desire to know, and I am happy to say it is yielding fair returns, even in these depressed times. Your wife is under the impression that you are still in the South Seas, treasure-seeking, and I have delivered regularly to her the letters you forwarded to me. You have been a true friend to me, Chester. Where is my wife now living? With her parents. They have removed lately to the glebe. This is her address. He handed an envelope over as he spoke and awaited further inquiries. Is Rosa well? Yes. Last time I saw my cousin she was very well indeed. Do you intend to visit her at once? For candidly, I don't think it would be advisable if you desire to keep your past a secret from the poor girl. No, I have some business to do before I can see her or let her know I am in Sydney. When I am ready, I should like you to still to act as my friend and break the tidings of my arrival to her gently, as I don't want to agitate her. We have been so long separated that it mightn't do to jump in on her all of a sudden. The lawyer looked at the blue spectacles demurely for a moment, and then he said, That is only a right resolve on your part, and I will do all I can to help you not to startle Rosa. I am dying to see the darling, but when I next come to her, I hope to be beyond the necessity of leaving her any more. I have a little more speculation on hand, which, if it comes off successfully, will enable me to retire and live comfortably. Meantime, yes, I require some ready money to enable me to carry out the speculation. How much do you require? £1,500 for a few weeks only, and with it I hope to clear 50 times that amount. It is a large sum to get a hold of at so short a notice, for your property is all tied up at present. Still, if you can assure me that it is only for a few weeks and the return is sure, I think it might be managed. Within a fortnight from the time I get this advance, I shall be able to place it in your keeping, perhaps 100 times the amount. Very well. Tomorrow night I'll give you an open check and an introduction to the bank. Have you any choice of banks? Yes, I should like to open accounts at the Fiji Limited, George Street. Very good, I'll see to that. What name shall I make the check payable to? John Williams? John Williams. Any further instructions? No. Only if you're near the glebe at any time, you may say to Rosa that you expect me back soon. I shall make it a point to call upon my uncle and aunt tonight, and will deliver your message to my cousin at the same time. You're a good fellow, Chester, to befriend me like this after what I've done, and believe me, whatever happens to me, I trust to be able to keep the knowledge of it from your cousin. I hope so. Indeed, I expect so much from you, for that is only your duty towards your innocent wife and her relations. Don't fear for me, I'll be secretive and game enough. Does Rosa speak much about me? Of course. The poor child misses you dreadfully, but as I have paid her income regularly, she is comfortable enough and not under the same anxiety regarding ways and means as some other wives are. She looks forward to your return as a wealthy man, and she is anticipating a good time in England and the continent when that comes off. She'll have it too, the angel. Whoever suffers, by George. That puts new blood into me, and my next diving operation will be a big success, you bet. Goodbye for the present, said the lawyer with a smile as he rose briskly. I'll come here with a check tomorrow night about 9 o'clock. You'll be here? Yes. Goodbye. Mr. Chester took up his slate-tinted kid gloves with his stick and hat, and quitted his companion with a quick step, without shaking hands with him or looking back, while the disguised man watched his retreat with eyes that showed a little moisture behind his darkened spectacles. Here's a fine fellow, if a bit cold and stiff with me. Many a one in his position would have plundered me wholesale, with all that money at his discretion, while I'd only have had to grin and bear it. But Arthur Chester wouldn't do that. I expect he thinks this one thief is enough in the family. Besides, he is too fond of Rosa to do her a wrong. His strong and resolute head drooped for a moment on his hand as he thought on the Sydney girl, whose love he had won under false pretenses and away from this same cousin. True, the family had been poor enough when he first came amongst them as a man with assured income. A fiction he had managed to keep up with the aid of Arthur Chester ever since. Arthur Chester, who had only been a subordinate until, with those ill-gotten gains, he was able to begin business for himself. For Jack Milton had been daring and successful disciple of the late Charles Pearce, except for that slight mistake of his in Victoria. He had been prudent enough to work alone as much as possible and confide a few of his secrets, what money he stole to this cousin of his wife, only when forced to do so. I wonder if it is principle that makes Chester so standoffish with me. He was glad enough to borrow my money when he was a clerk, and the receiver isn't much better, if any, than the thief. I hadn't been in jail then, though. At least he didn't know it if I had, and he pretends rarely not to know where my money comes from. Perhaps he is jealous of me with Rosa, and I cannot blame him if he is, for who could help being in love with that little angel? The professor broke in here upon the cogitations of the housebreaker, and instantly his careless, mocking manner returned. Well, you old scarecrow, I've settled matters with my lawyer, and we are to have supplies needful for taking those premises. So now I'm off to arrange with the landlord about terms and occupation. You keep out of it for the present until I can make you look respectable, if that is possible, and brace up your tottering mind to be in possession and a fashionable soothsayer by the end of the week. With these bantering remarks, he put on his soft hat and sauntered out to the blazing sunshine, leaving the foolish psychometrist in a rapture of admiration and rosy visions. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Désert by Kumiko. Check out more of their work on their website and their Patreon, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Thanks again, good night, and sweet dreams.